Hello, everyone. So it's funny that we started by naming states that have a vested interest in fighting climate change, given they're quite exposed. So the topic today is to explore ESG value creation. And to start with, I think it's worth reminding that most private equity players, and I think it's especially the case for us as infrastructure players, do not wait for regulation to start considering ESG in our action plan and in our value creation plan. Maybe on that, when you can give a few examples of how you've historically used at Vauban ESG as a value creation tool, whether it's risk reduction, cost reduction, or growth opportunities.
No, exactly, and I think it will answer the first introduction line we had. We're covering, we're investing in Europe mainly. We have 10 billion under asset management in infrastructure assets around Europe, but also in US. We have a diversification pocket in US, and it's very interesting to see when you discuss about ESG. I never mentioned the word ESG or climate, but have very interesting conversation up there in US and in Canada. We were just in Canada last week. And we don't mention ESG, we don't mention climate, we mention value proposal, opportunities, risk adaptation plans. And that does resonate a lot with industrials. It's a lot of projects going out, a lot of interest in what is happening, what are the trends, and what are the assets that they can invest in, how they can evolve in their business thanks to those kind of KPIs, I would say. So just going back to the value creation, going out of the COVID period, most of our assets, which are large industrials and being on the ground, are facing some real issues in terms of attractivity to hire new people or even to keep the actual people. So when you add an additional, I would say, value proposal by having values in what they are proposing within their corporation, it's an additionality. So it's something that is going to make them differentiate themselves from the market. I'm not saying it's replacing the value, the salary of the employees, but it's an additionality that is valuable today in the market. Speaking of attractivity, yesterday someone was asking me, what about parity? Because you're looking at the parity KPI at the board level. That's something that I believe now most of the GPs are looking at. But what about the parity in the corporates? And I was telling them, in fact, they are struggling to hire new people. So for them to have access to women, it's an additional, I would say, bucket of people to go to. So they're very keen, even in their communication, to show that they have specific training, they have specific, I would say, programs to hire people in their team. It's just more people to get hired, honestly, and they don't say no to that. So that's maybe in terms of attractivity. Then if we speak about we did a research on the social license to operate, so that's something we do for all of our assets. We review all the stakeholders around each of the assets. Who are they working with? What are their relationship with the local authority, the relationship with the contractors, so we can look at the supply chain circularity issues. And the relationship with not only the final client, but the relationship with the local people. How do they implement the asset? How they grow the asset with the people and not against them? That's maybe one of the key reasons of the infrastructure. We say essential infrastructure, and to get essential, you need to take in consideration the society itself. So I would say local penetration. When they do that, they figure out that they have easier relationship, and in fact they do it quite naturally. They have easier relationship with the local authorities, they win markets, they stay on the longer run, and it's in terms of opportunities, opening doors. I would say the third pillar when we speak about value creation, it's of course a risk adaptation and taking in consideration climate risk is visible in some of our assets. We can't avoid it. It's not only about getting hot, it's about having no water to get access to, is how you manage those kind of issues. So physical risk, but also adaptation risk. For example, I'll give a very sensitive topic. We're investing in Indigo, which is a parking, mostly known in France, in Canada, and Brazil. But Indigo having large parking, for example, in center of Paris, where you're not supposed to have combustible cars by 2030. I'm not sure we'll reach that point, but it's on the way. So there are much less cars in our parkings. And how you work with the team, the management team, to explain to them it's aligned with our target. Our climate target is to have more and more EV charging in our parking. How we can adapt the business in order to give access to partners. So they come during the night, they charge, it's another business line. We have more spaces, but we have spaces in center city, which is very strategic. How we use this strategic positioning in order to get access to some kind of large delivery, we want to have those places in center of the city. So Indigo developed the last mile delivery service by bike. You can see some of them around Paris, which is a new line of business, which was not existing a few years ago. So they're very, I'm very, a believer in the industry because they are clever people. They see where is the interest.
And as you mentioned, that it's with North American easier to talk to them about value creation. It's also easier when you have your management teams. Not all management teams are like the professional type of managers. For instance, in our case, we have a lot of the guys that come from family-owned business, so it's different. Or they started their own business. They are the entrepreneurs themselves. There is always the risk when you talk about ESG, especially if they are 50 and above, that they think, okay, it looks like CSR, it looks like putting a bit of green paint here and there. If you start engaging with them with action plan and say, okay, if you do that action, potentially we will solve that issue. You mentioned the scarcity in terms of resources. We have difficulties in finding fiber installers. We have difficulties hiring bus drivers. So we can use diversity. We can use those programs to tap into. Indeed, we don't see a lot of female installers, we don't see a lot of female bus drivers, so we have a program for that. Or we can address other parts of the population. In London, we have used a program to target local, let's say, troubled youngsters, or at least youngsters that had some issues with the law enforcement. Training them, giving them a job, solve an issue for them. It makes also the company proud. You create this sense of belonging, and it does work better. The interest is developing for this value creation. Now we have those new regulations that apply to us, but also apply to our company. And there is one that is clearly a beast in terms of adaptation, which is the CSRD. It's a lot of reporting for companies that can be actually quite small. If you're an infra company with 250 people, you're providing services, the management layer that could address that might be relatively small. The rest of the guys, they are the workers, they work in the workshops, they can be drivers, they can really work as blue collars. And again, there is a risk that this is perceived as yet another reporting, yet another European law. And I don't know for your companies, but the initial reaction, and starting from the SFDR, when we started to ask for the PASI, etc., was, again, why so many data? Why so many regulation? And aside from a couple of companies that were already mature and were embracing that change, we were facing some reluctance.
Pushback, of course. I mean, out of 70 plus portfolio assets I got, I would say 1/3 will have to report in 2026 based on 2025 data. So basically, they have to find a solution by the end of the year to make sure they will be able to collect the data. So they did the exercise. I've been following them during the summer. They did the first exercise of double materiality. So reviewing how many data points they will have to report on. So I'll just write it down because it's altogether is 1,141 data points for CSR. So for large, I mean, they're facing different issues. I would say the very large corporate got the capacity to hire a consultant, but they face the fact that they got thousands of employees, they got hundreds of units, and in different geography. So it's a very big struggle. And the smaller ones don't have the capacity to hire those large support. They don't have the capacity in time to do it. So it's kind of an operational risk we are facing there. So the idea is to make sure that they understand what is very important. So out of the 1,141 data points, after the double materiality exercise, they end up around 400 to 500 data points, and they already fell from the chair. and then the idea was to have some kind of discussion together of what has to be prioritized, what is material today for you. So the way we did it is that in a very French and friendly way, we invited them for lunch. And food is always working. So we invited them for lunch with one of our consultants, which is the consultant of one of our large companies in the portfolio, which was nice enough and I think clever enough to do a free presentation and a free Q&A session. So the idea was, of course, to have them in the same room. So it was maximum 2% per asset. So it's not too crowded, and we can still speak together. So they can discuss about the challenges they are facing and where they stand. So some of them were not done with double materiality, but ending up finding out they were a bit late. And finding out it was not a joke. It's extremely expensive to implement those kind of regulations. So if it's only a tick-the-box exercise, it's going to be a very expensive tick-the-box exercise. So, of course, first question is, okay, great. Once we get there, what kind of value can we take out of it? How can we pay back the bill, basically? So that was very the mean of the information share. Say, what is your challenge? For the consultant to say what is very meaningful, what is going to be so maybe for the one who don't really know CSRD, the big news in CSRD, so it's a regulatory, so European directive that imposed to large company and to a company that are facing a certain number of employees, certain data point, financial data point, to report on a specific type of reporting for extra financial data. Those data have to be reported, but also have to be audited, which is kind of new in the market, and which is not already applied for the SFDR, so for the financial player, but we are big believer and job creators for Luxembourg. We do audit our SFDR report, and we believe that should be the way for the market, because if not self-reporting, it engages only yourself. If you have a third-party review, I believe it helps you also to improve your data. It's what is going to happen for a corporate. So they will have to report on much more data than we do, and to audit those data. I can tell you, for doing it for 2 years in a row, the first year is painful. It's very painful. And the second year is even more painful, because you figure out that the data needs to make sense 1 year after the other. And that's how, when you figure out that you have some issues sometime in some of your data. But it improves your way of doing things. And that's exactly the philosophy of this directive, is to be transparent, but also to be improving. So the big challenge today, because we had the first audit trail review. So what is going to be audited, what is going to be compulsory in this directive? It's not so much a thing that you have to say. It's a 3-year exercise to get at the point to be excellent in this reporting championship, I would say. But the first 2 years is really for you to get up to speed. The only issue is that you have to be transparent. So if you don't report on one data, you have to say, I'm not able to report on this data. And that, in terms of communication, is very difficult for those assets, because it totally gets the point that it's a differentiator today in the market. And that's where value creation comes in the picture. Now they understand by being the best in class in this reporting means that they have the capacity to follow those data on the ground with their employees, with their processes, in terms of governance, and that they are good at it. So if they're good at it, hopefully they do good thing out of it. But it's becoming now adding value in terms of competition, which is a new thing now in the market.
I think that's an important point, is we have to remind that all those data, all those data points, they will be made public, so anyone can look at it. So your competitors can look at it, compare themselves. You could have the potential buyers, obviously, and since it's the same format, it's less easy to pick and choose and present you in the best way possible. But it also means any NGO, any stakeholder has access to it. And for all companies, there are always things that are a bit awkward when you have work accidents, etc. It's not necessarily things that you want out in the open, but those are things that are going to be out in the open. And where through the digital platform as well, the data will be more easy to compare and to benchmark. That's going to put pressure on everyone, which I think is a good thing. For instance, if I take work accidents, in some sectors it's very, very difficult to benchmark work accidents. So managers can always say, you know, I'm doing okay compared to whatever benchmark. Now, you're going to have, let's say, all public transport companies on CSRD because they will all meet those criteria, and you will know exactly where they stand. So that's kind of emulation competition, which ultimately, at least from our point of view as ESG people, will help ourselves because it will create some emulation. There is nothing more powerful when we try to push an action to say, look, this competitor, they're doing it, or your client is going to ask for it. That's the best way for a company to move or to start moving is to have that. Then you have the ones that have understood, and generally they're the ones that have already done their CSRD report or attempted, is they realize that they can get ahead of their competitors, they can present better, and that's going to be good in the end for their clients as well, the public authorities, to show that we do have the tangible results. That's one thing that is always difficult with ESG, is that we are lacking metrics. It's like, you know, if you talk to any company, they will tell you that they want to be carbon neutral, that they have an action plan, that, okay, but then you have the one that have a route that is stamped by a label or by the SBTi, and you have the others. And maybe the one that have obtained the label or the SBTi are not necessarily the best one, but it's already a guarantee that something is being done. It's going to be probably the same on CSRD, but in a few years.
Let's say it's getting out of the communication effect. So we had a lot of communication, we had a lot of reporting and different type of standards. I see new standards coming up every 6 months. And now we need something that we can compare, that it's stable. And I think the regulation is the best way to go for it. So it's painful the first year, it's painful the second year, and it gets painful the third year. But let's say it gets much better. And the value creation is coming by getting better, by making sense out of those data and put together action plans that we can reach our targets and bring the new people in, bring new business in, bring value to the asset. That's the end game. I mean, I get very frustrated when I go to events like that and we speak about data and only data and how we can collect the data. Can we report the data? What's a new framework of data reporting? And I'm like, man, we totally forget why we are doing all of that. If I wanted to kill ESG, I would do exactly the same. I would say the same. ESG is dead. We are spending most of our time doing reporting and nobody is reading our reporting. I had this experience. I had to answer to a new standard of reporting and it was so crazy. I ended up calling my investors, so my LP that I have a really good relationship with, and say, excuse me, but I don't see the point of what I'm doing. It's been 1 week I'm working on this Excel. It doesn't make any sense. I'm trying to compare pear and apples. It doesn't make sense. And he just told me, you know what? I know. Just put the name of the fund on top of it and send it blank. I was like, serious? I'm not going to say that to my analyst who's working on it since a week. But it was like, yes, but someone up there just say we'll do it, so we're doing it, but we all know it doesn't make any sense. And like, I mean, those kind of crap need to disappear from the market. We need to clean up the market of reporting in terms of ESG. And that's why the regulation is pushing for. And hopefully get there. But someone was telling me on the financial data reporting, it took decades to have accountability that makes sense. And even now, sometimes it's borderline. In ESG, we need to do it within few years. We need to get out of this trap of getting too much reporting and getting crazy with that. We need to make sure that we are material, we are pragmatic. And I'm also a big believer in the technology. I think not data provider, data management tools are saving my life. When I began this work like 4 years ago, I was on Excel. If I stayed on Excel, I would have died. Online data management tool help us to have a very dynamic and easygoing, friendly users type of feelings when we do it. And next step is how we integrate AI. I mean, it's a big word today. I heard it like several times, but it's true. It's disruptive. We can't get without it. That's the way to go, and how we can then make sense and spend more time doing asset management with our teams. I would say that's the way to go.
It will simplify our work as well, because in the past years we've seen the LPs asking us more and more things on ESG, but always with different frameworks in mind. Often they're proprietary frameworks. And you can tell them, oh, look, I have a consolidated report where you will find all the information. Ultimately, they want their own format, their own data set to be filled. At least with those regulations, ultimately, for us, it's going to simplify our life as a GP. Obviously, it's going to simplify also the data collection and the work with the companies. In a way, one other advantage with CSRD, I would say, is, and again, I'm projecting myself in 5 years in the future, is today when we buy a company and we're talking about climate change, usually they look at you like, okay, but climate-related risk, what are you talking about? And like, are you exposed to risk? Have you thought of those risks? Have you thought of, I don't know, risk of flooding, risk of fires due to extreme heat? And they usually have not thought of that because they say, oh, it has not happened. Yeah, but you know that within the next 15 or 20 years, it's going to happen, or at least the probability will increase. And we're in infrastructure, so all business, or what we build, normally is there to last for more than 20 years. And they have to think about that. And once you get them into this mode, they start coming up with, okay, we might have a problem there. Let's do an adaptation. Let's find solutions, etc. The advantage of things like the CSRD is that a lot of companies, without our inputs, a lot of management will already have had to make this exercise. The drawback that potentially I see is that not everyone is on the CSRD, and the smallest companies would not be able to bear the costs. So there might be a disconnect at some point between the smallest companies and the largest one. But I say those ones where we will still be able to help them understand and develop their plan. Understand also what's material for them.
Yeah, I think it's maybe the key of all of that. It's how we collaborate. So how the big ones are making the way for the smaller ones to understand what kind of tools they can use, how they can use same tool together, how can do, I mean, we do contract with one consultant so they can help the entire portfolio, and how they can learn from each other. And collaboration is key also in best practices. You're mentioning the fact that they resonate a lot with what the competitors are doing and what their final clients are asking for. But they listen to their peers more than listen to me. If I tell them that's the best practice, they say, okay, lady, you don't know my market, you've never been on the ground with me. But if they listen to their peers saying, we have put this kind of target and we have initiative to reach them, then the reaction is, how come? I don't have those kind of targets. How come my team is telling me it's impossible if yours is saying it's possible? So they listen to each other. So that's maybe, I would say, for us has been the key. We do annual research. It's on the thematic. It's more actual research on the thematic that makes sense for us. So we were speaking about digitalization of the infrastructure during the COVID, climate impact on the infrastructure after the COVID because everything was going up the roof, social license to operate because once you see that's not a transition but it's a revolution you will have to do in your asset, you need to have everyone around the table to figure out how to manage it. Circularity, because you don't achieve climate change without circularity, and managing the material, how you plan your infrastructure, and how you manage the entire supply chain. And this year is about inclusive infrastructure. Once again, is to do not forget that it's essential infrastructure for the community, for the society. And if we don't tackle the entire society issues, I mean, through at least giving access to our infrastructure to everyone in a proper way, we are losing the game. At the end, we become stranded assets. We become the bad guys in the room, in a way. And we can push whatever regulation, whatever targets in terms of climate. If we don't associate the people around the table, we'll never achieve anything. And that's maybe one of the lessons we learn in a painful way in France with a yellow jacket, for example, and very nice way of showing up how we can react back in France. But it was very meaningful. If you don't listen to what everyone is looking for, if you don't embark everyone, you will never go anywhere. And same with the regulation. If they don't see what is the end game, it will never make any sense for anyone. It will just be painful and expensive. And that's how we get sacked at the end of the day.
On that note, that's a great ending point, I think. Can I have a round of applause, please, for our excellent contribution on ESG? Thank you.